Hello and welcome back to my channel. And today I have another dedicated review for a book that I read through the Reedsy Discover program. So if you're not familiar with the Reedsy program, basically it is kind of like an advanced reader copy selection where basically like one person can read and review a book and then like shout it out if it's really good or bad or whatever to kind of promote or vet the authors. So this is a complimentary copy that I got for this book, and it's something that I have been trying to get better at because I tend to get ARCs from big publishers, but I kind of forget sometimes about the Reedsy Discovery is just as important because it's often small or self-published authors that are on this platform. So for the month of April, I decided that I wanted to read poetry because it was National Poetry Month, and I picked up Fragment by David Boyer. Now this is a book that comes out soon, maybe a week now by the time you guys see this, and it was something that I was interested in based on the initial synopsis and because it was a male author and I tend to not read a lot of male poets, so I wanted to give it a shot. The synopsis is as follows. An ad for this book might say something like it's a haiku travel diary, dream drama, recently re-earthed and mistranslated into so many English-ish paragraphs for a novel-related poem. Adjacent self-portrait our hero of glues together with gold insomnia and a car alarm that produces unnameable small flowers of late early spring as nobody's new odyssey reforms itself with itself. You may choose to avoid this hero's journey, of course. You should refuse at least twice. But in the crepuscular aching beneath the sofa, who talks like this anyway, or whatever you hear, please come inside. It's like cats and that's a mouthful. So that is essentially how the collection goes. And you may or may not jive with that. It is very, I will say it's one of the truest synopses I've ever read because it's basically his poetry is that form where it is kind of nonsensical, and aka the title is Fragments, and it seems to be a lot of fragmented thoughts that are going through this. Now, I haven't actually looked into more of the author necessarily. I don't know if this is his first collection. He does seem to be a relatively new author to the Reedsy program. So the Reedsy program, you can be a reviewer or you can be an author and put your work up on this as well, and there is no it's very sparse, so I'm guessing this is his first book and or at least the first time he's used Reedsy, and that could be good or bad. I'm not going to base a book's merit on whether it's a first time debut or not, but I will get into my review now, and it will be a little bit spoilerly, but I won't go into too much stuff because it really is a poetry collection and it's a short book. So when I first opened this book, I'm not gonna lie, I immediately regretted everything. I had a really hard time reading it. When it comes to poetry, I'm not against freeform and prose-like poetry. I do tend to enjoy poems that have form and meter or like some sort of purpose to why things are written the way they are. So in some sense, I get why this book was written as fragments. Like basically they're run-on thoughts in sentences, and when you're first getting into this book, it's very overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. I couldn't even make sense of some of the paragraphs, and that frustrated me a lot. I had to reread it, and for me, it's not enjoyable if I have to continuously reread just to understand what's being said. With poetry, like sometimes you could do that, and that's kind of the intent, where you can read it once and kind of think one thing, and then you read it again and you get a different meaning, or you get more expansion on that meaning because you read it once before. This was more of just like, I don't even know what's being said here, so I have to reread it over and over again. And then there were still times where I've read some of the sentences and I'm like, I don't think this was anything. It just sounded like and I'm a therapist. I also have like a lot of anxiety thoughts and ADHD thoughts. So it literally sounded like being in my head or like talking to, you know, a client who has a lot of anxiety and sharing what's in their head. And it was very suffocating in a lot of ways. I was like, I don't want to be reading this because this is my daily life. Like, this is too much. And because of that, and because none of it seemed to make sense sometimes, I had a hard time like trying to figure out like what is actually going on and like what the author was trying to convey. There was times where I tended to skip over things because I got too convoluted. So trying to figure out like what the author was getting at wasn't always great. Then occasionally he would have like parts where I really liked them, and I'm going to read a small bit just to kind of show you how like the sentence structure is. This one was from number 11, and it's, we imagine ourselves still rushing through, though these crumbled things need their own slow time. As a plant in a pot, but in the forest, from the slipperiest slime mold to the always hungry deer to the most sturdy, studious, generous, genial old oak, and all the families it carries. The water that runs off the leaves in tiny rivulets, rolling down over rocks and aerial roots to river arms and off out of our little story, where I feel the need to prod and poke, make my fingers dirty, cutting and clipping, grafting, fertilizing in a place like. So it's still a fragment, but I thought that one was really well done and it sounded very nice to read. But they're not all like that, where this one I felt like we had a lot of really good descripting words. Like I felt like all of these things, like these old things decomposing and like starting new and stuff like that, like was really good imagery. And of course it ends on a like. And I think that's where I was getting really frustrated, because it feels like some of these are building up with such great words and play on like the sounds, but then they end and we don't really get anything out of that. But throughout this, it definitely seems like the author was trying to convey like how hard writing is and publishing in this, because right after that one, there are a few lines about the self-publishing business, that you're alone and you're isolated, and despite all of that and the struggles, like he still wants to do the work and push through. And that seems to be a theme again throughout, but it's very muddled. And I don't know if I was the target audience for this, because I really like having some sort of structure. Because it's also fragments, like instead of having every single poem be comprised of these run-on sentences and sentences that just end abruptly, I would have loved to see the author play around with form and like breaking sentences in a poetic structure to create that fragment. I think that could have been strong in some ways, and it might have just pulled some things together for me. I just think it started to really bog me down as I really got into like paragraph of nonsense, paragraph of nonsense, paragraph. I needed some sort of different structure. And I really, like I said, would have loved to see like just in the way that the poem read on a page, like looking at like a sentence here and then a break, or like, you know, a word half like stopping and then starting in another sentence. Like I would have liked that, but like a much smaller focused poem instead of the run-on sentences. There's also a lot of conversation about, again, writing things thrown into the other like mixture. So we had the self-publishing tidbit, we had the NaNoWriMo project like talking about, and I don't really know again how they're supposed to connect with everything else, because in the, you know, one right after that poem 11, if you will, or chapter 11, I don't know how they're actually supposed to work, we have 12, and it starts about NaNoWriMo. Then we talk about like getting up every day, and then we talk about vegetables and shooing flies out the wing, and then we have, you know, the clouds in the sky or the lack thereof. And yeah, it just, I don't know. I want to appreciate the like on the nose bit of these fragments and how they are in our thoughts, but it's not something I'm enjoying at the end of the day. I do think people out there would appreciate this a lot more than I can, and I think it's just because it's how my brain focuses. And I'm a writer myself, and like I edit for people, or like I critique a lot of the times more than anything. So for me, I would be like marking all of these up as like, because they're in a paragraph. So I'm like, oh, these are all run-on sentences. But then on the other hand of things, I feel like as a poet, I just want a little bit more variety out of it, because I also write poetry. So I might be coming at this a little too harshly on the writer-poet cap and not so much as a reader. But even if I wasn't in that sphere, I just don't think this is my type. I'm not a big fan of micro poetry, as you may know on my channel, and I really, really appreciate metaphors and forms and like intentional breaks. So overall, I just don't think this was the poetry collection for me. But again, there was definitely some good gems in there, like good lines, even if they're fragmented. Like I liked what the imagery was evoking. And as we get more into the novel, like there is more like shorter sentences. Like this one, and for instance, was 35, and I'm still trying to like I'm trying to think of how it actually works, because I'm trying to figure out if like I still don't even know if the italicized like thoughts versus like the poetic thoughts, because there's italicized and then there's like blocks of normal text and then italicized. But this one, for instance, I think it's supposed to, I don't even know if it's supposed to start and end. I think it does, which is also why I'm confused. So like in 34, it ends with, and I'm sure it does at least in part stem from my childhood when we couldn't afford everything that I, 35, and then the next one, wanted. And I wanted all the toys. There was always some commercial or catalog. And they keep going, like, but there's like this block of text in between that has something to do with the foundation of their house. And then it continues, that would feed my greed for new garbage. And even if I had gotten all of it, would I have felt any better? I think another thing about the bathrooms and stuff like that. So I'm so torn on this, and I feel like I have to give it like a 3 out of 5 stars because I'm so in the middle of the road. In some ways, I love that he's playing with this structure, especially more towards the end where we have these italicized conversations about being broken up by this house, because I do think that's representative of our train of thoughts, especially when we're really struggling. But reading that over and over and over again for a poetry collection was not always my jam. So that's where I'm going to end this review. I'm very middle of the road. I don't think it was terrible. I don't think it was quite for me. I would consider picking up another book of poetry by this author, especially if he decides to do some other structure plays with like this. The fragment thing, not my favorite, but again, I do like the effort, and I liked the concept because it is very unique in a lot of ways. So there you go, guys. I don't know if this review is going to be helpful. I hope it is, but overall, like, if you're interested in this weird kind of dynamic of fragment poetry, then I would say go for it, and you might enjoy it. So thanks for watching, and that is all for me today. So until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.